This will be the solution to the asynchronous activity for Tuesday, where the goal is to convert the paragraph to passive voice, but also to eliminate ambiguous words. So using the techniques of both technical description 1 and now technical description 2. So the paragraph begins with first, you harvest the Antarctic ice by drilling a fairly deep hole in the ice sheet. So let's treat this as, there's a comma, but let's treat this as the first sentence that we're going to dissect. And you see the logical or the temporal flow begin by the use of the word first. And so we can expect there to be a second or a finally or third or whatever. And so we're going to keep that word because that word helps control the temporal perspective, the chronological perspective of the reader. So let's take this first sentence. You harvest the Antarctic ice up to the comma and paste it here for analysis. Now, that would be a grammatically complete sentence on its own. It's in the second person. It happens to be in the present tense, you harvest. The subject is you. The verb is harvest. The object is the Antarctic ice. And then there's the parenthetical rest of the sentence is a clarifying detail by drilling a fairly deep hole in the ice sheet. So that goes there. So in order to convert to passive voice, we must place the object first. So first, the Antarctic ice. Now, we can't say the Antarctic ice harvest. We want to say the Antarctic ice is harvested. The Antarctic ice is harvested. That would be a grammatically complete sentence, but we need more information. What if we added the rest of the sentence there? Let's read that. First, the Antarctic ice is harvested by drilling a fairly deep hole in the ice sheet. That makes sense. There is an ambiguous adjective there, fairly deep. We have one of two choices. We could either cut the mention of the deepness of the hole and just leave it undefined for the reader. Maybe the reader doesn't really need to know how deep this hole is to understand the concept of the purpose of this paragraph. The purpose of this paragraph is to show how we estimate global average temperatures back thousands of years. The deeper the ice, the older it is, much like sedimentation layers in rock. But air is trapped in the ice, and so we need that old air and the new air to compare to understand something about the relative temperatures. So maybe we want to communicate the idea of the deepness of the hole to the reader, but without the deepness, it would just be the Antarctic ice is harvested by drilling a hole in the ice sheet. So there we've cut the adjective altogether. If we wanted to be specific about the deepness, we could say something perhaps like by drilling a 1 kilometer deep hole in the ice sheet. If you don't know exactly how deep we're going, I think it's better to leave it undefined and then let the reader decide in their imagination how to parse that. So let's move on to the second half of the first sentence where it's attached to the first part of the first sentence with comma and. We'll delete the and. You separate the ice core into somewhat shorter segments. This is in the second tense, the second person, the present tense. Now understand that the whole paragraph, if you skim through it, you can see that it's consistently written in the second person. And if you look here, like that's second person present tense. You can graph. What about you suction the gas? So this is always second person present tense. So it's been consistently written, but we're going to convert it. So it's always a good idea to stay consistent in your tenses. If you mix tenses, sometimes that gets confusing for the reader. So the subject is you, the verb is separate, and the object is the ice core, and the parenthetical rest of the sentence is a clarifying detail, so into somewhat shorter segments. So you separate the ice core into somewhat shorter segments. Now we want the present tense and passive voice. So we put the object first, the ice core, and separate. We can't say the ice core separates itself or the ice core separate. I think we need to write is separated. The ice core is separated into somewhat shorter segments, and the ambiguous word there is somewhat shorter segments, and I think we can just get away with deleting it. The ice core is separated into shorter segments. If you say that, notice how terse that is. That's concise. It's a short sentence. It gets right to the point. We're cutting the ice core into pieces. Shorter is an adjective, but it's an allowed adjective. Why? Because it's relative. So we're adding information without confusing the reader. Whatever the length of the original core is, we're chopping it into smaller pieces or shorter segments. So the reader doesn't need to know necessarily how deep we're going exactly, just that it's chopped into smaller pieces so that it's manageable. Let's focus on the next sentence. After you store the ice core into segments and transport them to the lab bench, you systematically melt the core segments with a hot wire wrapped around the core inside of a gas chamber. So this is a little bit harder of a sentence because it's got multiple parts. So this first part is not a complete sentence grammatically, but it has, so you could say you store the ice core segments and transport them into the lab bench. That is a complete sentence, but if you add the word after, it's almost a guarantee that something needs to come after the phrase, and so um, it would be difficult to split these two sentences without changing the word after. But if we want to keep this after comma, setup, then we could change the sentence a little bit, and at the same time accomplish the goal of getting the sentence into passive voice. So the idea is we want to eliminate you. So instead of saying after you store, take the person out of it. What if we wrote after storing the ice core segments and transporting them to the lab bench? Now let's shorten this up a little bit. So how about after storing the ice core segments, or maybe even don't worry about the storing at all, just after transporting the ice core segments to the lab bench. So that's a shorter sentence, and it also conveys the necessary information. We've got to get the pieces to the lab. Then you systematically melt the core segments and with a very hot. Okay, so let's save this part at least. We're keeping the word after. We could have just as easily said next, you transport the ice to the lab bench, and then next, we could have added it to the list, but with such is life, we have choices when we write. after transporting the ice core segments to the lab bench, you systematically, okay, so the second person is there again, you, and then the verb with its adverb is systematically melt, and then the object is the core, or objects are the core segments. And then there's some clarifying information with a very hot wire wrapped around the core inside a gas chamber. Um, so we have this parenthetical rest of the sentence. So the subject needs to go away. The object will come first. So let's say the core segments. So let me just give you the answer, and then we'll talk about it. So the verb is melt, systematically melt. So the core segments is plural, so we should say are melted systematically. That would be a complete sentence. The core segments are melted systematically. Um, Systematically is an adverb. It modifies the verb, so it comes after. We can place it before. We could say are systematically melted or are melted systematically. I think it's better idea to put the adverb after the verb, because are and melted are both kind of like verbs in this sentence. You don't want to place an adverb in between them. It's better to put the adverb after. I'm not sure exactly where that came from, but that's what I've been told. That's just one of those tricks that some teacher taught me a long time ago, and I don't remember when. So I've placed the adverb systematically after the verb are melted. The core segments are melted systematically. Now we have the parenthetical rest of the sentence with a very hot wire. Um, Very hot that's an ambiguous adjective. We don't need that. In fact, we don't really um, to be extra short or extra concise. We don't even have to say how the cores are melted. We could just say the core segments are melted systematically inside a gas chamber, or we can add a clarifying detail with a wire inside a gas chamber. Now, a gas chamber maybe could be made more specific. So, inside a chamber capturing gases, a chamber that captures escaping gases. How about that? So, a gas chamber could be something that moves gas or captures it or takes it away, or it's like more. We need more to be more specific there. We don't want the reader to get the wrong idea. So the next sentence is you suction the gas into a canister. This is a good example of a nice short sentence. You suction the gas into a canister. This is the gas that is escaping from the ice, so maybe we can add that detail. But first, let's get it into the passive voice. So this is second person, you. The verb here is suction, and then the object is the gas, and then the clarifying details are into a canister. So we could convert that very easily into passive voice by just placing the object first. So uh, let's make it plural though. The gases are suctioned into a canister. So that's a little too simple. Let's be a little more detailed. The gases. How about the gases escaping the ice are suctioned into a canister? Right. The next sentence. So here we go. We've now reached. If I split the paragraph, like the first, there's a control flow word right there, and also there. Um, and so you could tell that the first part of the experiment is over, the collection of the material. Now we're going to collect the data. So we're going to add the word second here, and this is where the next phase of the measurement begins. So let's get the first sentence of the second phase. So the um, sentence is this one. You perform mass spectrometry on the gas in the canister corresponding to the segment. So again, the subject is in second person, you, and then the verb is perform, and then let's just put the rest of the sentence here and we'll decide, what is exactly the object. So um, in this case, I think that the object is the gas. You perform something on the gas, and then in the canister, and so forth is the clarifying detail. So how about we say for that second part, and then for the first part, mass spectrometry. You perform mass spectrometry on the gas in the canister corresponding to the segment. So what we want to do is put that in passive voice, but I think that maybe the details 1 and 2 just stay where they are, and we just cut away you and then put the object in the beginning. So, well, that is, you perform, and then then we have 1 on the gas 2. So what I'm trying to say is that mass spectrometry is performed on the gas. So this is a weird example because we could put what we called the object. So this object is complicated, right? We could have said second on the gas, mass spectrometry is performed for the canister corresponding to the segment. Let's say ice core segment, just to be clear. So if you say on the gas, mass spectrometry is performed for the canister, so that sounds Yoda-esque, right? Like it's like you're saying things sort of out of order. On the gas, comma, mass spectrometry is performed. You could clarify it by putting another comma, for example, second, on the gas, mass spectrometry is performed. I liked it better the first way, so if we just say second, mass spectrometry is performed on the gas. So in this case, the part of the object not defined as 1 or 2, it's on the gas, like that came, second somehow, but it just seems to be the correct order. The key, though, is we want to say is performed, because otherwise we can't say you is performing. That's not correct English. So we have to say mass spectrometry is performed because that's in passive voice. If we subtract the subject, you, then we can't, we can no longer use the simple present tense. We've got to use the passive voice. So second, mass spectrometry is performed on the gas in the canister corresponding to the ice core segment. What comes next? So actually we have another control flow word here, finally. So we got to keep that finally. before worrying about passive voice. We'll put it in bold. Actually, we'll put the comma in bold as well. So finally, you calculate the ratio of oxygen isotopes in the gas. So this is now explaining how the data is analyzed. This is in second person. The verb is calculate, and the object is the ratio. And then there's some clarifying details. So these details read of oxygen isotopes in the gas. So we're by doing this, the subject verb object technique, using the parenthetical rest of the sentence, it kind of breaks the sentence into its components so that you can rearrange them. A long time ago, a very long time ago, they used to teach something called diagramming a sentence, or breaking a sentence into its components. To convert from active and passive voice, this is something that is necessary. So I want you all to practice this skill, subject, verb, object, being able to identify those and switching them. So we want to say finally, instead of you calculate the ratio, how about the ratio is calculated of oxygen isotopes in the gas. It might, so let's see if that's a complete sentence. Finally, the ratio is calculated of oxygen isotopes in the gas. In this case, the clarifying details might need to be moved to be more clear. So when you say finally the ratio is calculated, the reader almost always asks what ratio you didn't say. So let's put the ratio of oxygen isotopes in the gas is calculated. And then there's the second, so there's a comma and then another sentence which is tacked on to that first sentence after finally. And it's just which is somewhat correlated with average atmospheric temperature when air bubbles were trapped in the ice. So this is not in second person anymore. It's in which is. So which, it refers to what? The oxygen isotopes. So I think that would be in third person. Still present, but I think it's already in passive voice, which is correlated. The problem with so the verb here is correlated, and then the object is just correlated. Well, I should say correlated with, and the object is average atmospheric temperature. And then there's some clarifying details when air bubbles were trapped in the ice. So that seems to be already in passive voice, so there's no need to change much. Only the thing is, now we've got a problem because we put a period here. Finally, the ratio of oxygen isotopes in the gas is calculated. So it might be better to restate the new subject. In passive voice, that's the object. So the object is the oxygen isotope. The ratio of oxygen isotopes in the gas is calculated. So let's pay careful attention here. What are we trying to say with this next sentence? The oxygen isotopes are correlated with average atmospheric temperature. That's the idea we're trying to get across. So we're going to repeat the new subject, the oxygen isotopes are correlated. And by the way, I'm deleting the word somewhat because that's an ambiguous, you don't need that adjective, right? Either it is correlated or it's not. We can talk about the strength of the correlation if we were providing more numerical detail, but the main thing is it is correlated, and you want to start with that and then talk about the strength of the correlation somewhere else. The oxygen isotopes are correlated with average atmospheric temperature when the gas in air bubbles were trapped, or how about just was trapped in the ice core. Finally, the ratio of oxygen isotopes in the gas is calculated. The oxygen isotopes are correlated with average atmospheric temperature when the gas in the air bubbles was trapped in the ice. When the gas in air bubbles was trapped, so again, that's passive voice, right? The gas, which would have been, you know, like we trapped the gas in the ice. The gas was trapped. That's in passive voice. So the gas has become the new subject rather than the object. So so that's a fine sentence. The oxygen isotopes are correlated with average, but one thing that we worked on in the beginning of the course was writing concisely. So technically, of oxygen isotopes in the gas, that's said here, and then also it has to be repeated here because this next sentence, which is now split away, it needs a subject. Every sentence has to have some kind of subject, even if it's in passive voice, and that subject is really what was formerly an object. There has to be something. You can't say, instead of saying the cat ran after the mouse, you can't say ran after the mouse. What ran after the mouse? Who knows? Ran after the mouse. That's not a complete sentence because there's no subject. So, since the subject is repeated, there's a chance to merge the sentences. So finally, let's try that. Finally, the ratio of oxygen isotopes in the gas is calculated. And what if we just said comma, and it is correlated with average atmospheric temperature when the gas in air bubbles was trapped in the ice core? That's pretty long. It does the job, but it's long. Finally, the ratio of oxygen isotopes in the gas is calculated. You could say which is correlated with average atmospheric temperature when the gas in air bubbles was trapped in the ice core. In fact, I think you could just say when the isotopes were trapped in the ice core. So that's still technically correct. It's when the oxygen in the air, the oxygen in the water molecule, or just O2 in the air, when it became an air bubble in the ice, was trapped in the ice core. Right, that's exactly what happened, but we really only care that there's oxygen, and so we could just say the isotopes. Um, so let's read that one more time. The ratio of oxygen isotopes in the gas is calculated, which is correlated with average atmospheric temperature when the isotopes were trapped in the ice core. All right, so we're done with that sentence. Now we have like our last sentence, which is really 3 phrases. Um, since you know that the deeper the air bubbles, the older the ice trapped inside, you can graph the average air temperature versus time over the centuries. So how about the subject is not since. The subject, let's put that there. Since it's a word that's like telling you. In fact, that might not even be necessary. It's like saying because or so that or therefore. Let's just delete that for now and come back to it. The subject here is now back to second person, and it's in present tense. You know that the deeper the air bubbles, the older the air trapped inside. Um, I could say know that is maybe part of the verb there. Um, the object is this idea. The deeper the air bubbles, the older the air trapped inside. But in this case, as is all cases when we convert to passive voice, the you is not necessary. You could say it is known that the deeper the air bubbles. So that would be a way to use the third person passive voice. You could just say it is known, like Game of Thrones, it is known. Bonus point if you get that reference. So it is known that the deeper the air bubbles, the older the air trapped inside. That would be a fine sentence to be correct, but I don't think that's really necessary because we have that word since. Since and the you might not even need passive voice here, but let's take a crack at writing a sentence using since. Try to convey the idea, the deeper the air bubbles, the older the air trapped inside. How about since the deeper air bubbles are older, since the deeper air bubbles are older, that's maybe not a full sentence, but it actually captures the idea. You know that the deeper the air bubbles, the older trapped inside, the air trapped inside. How about since the deeper air bubbles are older, you can maybe clarify that with geologically speaking, something like that. But it's nice and simple. Since the deeper air bubbles are older, um, the next part is you can graph the average air temperature versus time over the centuries. So this is back to second person. The verb is can graph. So to graph something is to create a graph. You can graph. So that's like that's a compound verb there, I guess. And then the object is the average air temperature. And there's a clarifying detail, versus time over the centuries. So if you want to put that in passive voice, then you would obviously get rid of the U, and then let's take it on home. The average, so the object comes first, the average air temperature. Now we can say can be graphed or is graphed. Since the deeper air bubbles are older, the average air temperature, how about can be graphed? And then we've taken the object first, then the verb, the U is gone, now we need the parenthetical rest of the sentence. So versus time over the centuries. Since the deeper air bubbles are older, the average air temperature can be graphed versus time over the centuries. So let's compare, now the paragraphs are done. We've edited this paragraph to death. So then let's compare the length of this paragraph. So let's take the top paragraph and paste it below the new one. How many sentences? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 sentences in the new paragraph. In the old one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there's actually, if you think about that, they have about the same number of sentences, but just this paragraph has fewer words. You can see that it's shorter. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines, right? So it's a full line shorter, but it says the same thing, and it also says it indirectly or passively, meaning that it doesn't incorporate the subject pronoun you. And so this paragraph would be, and herein lies the lesson, this paragraph would be easier to read in a scientific paper because It flows the same way, has the same information, but it does not involve the reader or the author. It's just talking about the results. It's shorter, and it takes away. It also eliminated ambiguous words. So in the first paragraph, we have things like fairly deep hole. Um, we have a very hot wire. So those things are not necessary, and they're just cut. And they're cut or changed in such a way that it results in a shorter paragraph, but you do somehow still understand what they did. So this has been the lesson on switching to passive voice while eliminating ambiguous words.